Hey guys, welcome back. I'm David, one of the co-founders of Two Joes Gaming, and I want to talk a little bit today about getting started. So, if you're doing mobile gaming apps like we're doing, it's probably going to be your best bet to look at using a game engine. So, there's several options out there on the board. We'll talk about some of the ones that we use. We'll talk about the one that we use. But off the top of my head, I can think of four right now. GameSolid, which is the one that we started with 3.5 years ago. We used that one for about 6, maybe 8 months. And what we found with GameSolid at the time, that it just wasn't very user friendly. We spent more time kind of stumbling our way through it than we did actually building anything. So after that, we came across Unity. We've been using Unity 3D ever since. So for almost 3 years now, we've been using that. And one of the great things about using a game engine um, is if you want to publish on both iOS and Android with some minor changes, a little bit of tweaking in your code, you can actually publish the same game relatively easily. Other options out there is obviously the Unreal Engine, and another one that I recently found a few months ago is called BuildBox. Now, BuildBox is actually designed and used primarily for what's called the hyper-casual market. Those are those simple little time wastes for games, and that's actually what we're trying to currently break into right now. One of the things that we like about Unity is it's very versatile. You can do just about anything with it. There's a ton of YouTube tutorials online that range anywhere from absolute beginner to intermediate and up to expert or approaching expert level. So that was one of the big draws for us. Additionally, their documentation is actually pretty well maintained. It'll give you the very basics. It'll give you some code examples. So if you have a general idea what you're trying to do, but you want to learn how to implement a specific method or a specific class, you can get to their documentation and pretty easily figure that out. But they also, and one of the big benefits that I like, they also have their own YouTube tutorials. They range anywhere from 2 or 3 minutes if they're talking about something simple, all the way up to they have hour plus long live events where they go deep dive into specific things. And then on top of that, there's plenty of other YouTube channels out there that use Unity and will break it down pretty well. For me, one of the first ones that I found was a YouTuber by the name of James Plus Games. And it was one of his platformer series that I was watching, and he'll do a specific kind of game, and he will take you step by step through it. And it actually gave me a good understanding, a better understanding of what we were doing. And this is coming from a very, very limited coding background. I'd had a few classes in college, and I'd done a little bit in high school, back in the back a ways. So things had changed quite a bit. So getting back into that and having somebody walk me through it step by step was very helpful. Here recently, I've been looking more at another YouTube channel called Unity 3D College. And again, this I would say is probably more on your intermediate level. But again, it's broken down very well. It's very easy to understand, broken down into bite-sized chunks. I think most of the videos range about 15 to 20 minute range, so it's not too much of your time. And very well done. Another one that I've used early on as I was transitioning from early beginner into sort of the intermediate range, is where I consider myself now, sort of at the intermediate range, was Brackeys. And I'll have links in the description to all three of these YouTube channels. If you're interested in coding whatsoever, I would highly suggest using these. It's all in C Sharp. Uh, so yeah, the first thing you want to do is you want to find yourself a game engine, and you want to shop around. There's plenty out there. I'm sure there's quite a bit more than what I actually mentioned. Look for, if you're new to coding, look for something that you can actually find a lot of tutorials on. Try and find, I would suggest, what worked for me is I found one or two people, like I talked about, we got Brackeys, Unity 3D College, and James Plus Games, and I follow their tutorials, and I'll go back quite often and kind of reference them. Unity 3D College is more of the upper intermediate to approaching expert level, and I'm using that channel more to help myself clean my code up and write a cleaner easier game to go back in and update later. So after you've done that, now you have to come up with your big idea, right? So the biggest thing that I've noticed, myself included, the biggest thing I noticed of what we did, and doing a little bit of research on it, I found that a lot of game developers, when they're first starting out, we all do this. We've been playing Battlefield, Call of Duty, Madden, all the big name titles that come out on a yearly or bi-yearly basis, and we think, oh man, I would want to make something like this, and I could do this, I could change this, and you have this big grand idea of what you're going to do. Or even if you're just looking at just mobile gaming, you have the big ones like currently I think one of the top rating games is Fortnite, and then you have Clash of Clans, which is always up there in the top, Pokemon Go, which made a ridiculous amount of money for what they did, and then Clash Royale. So, you can name on and on. So you always have those big name brands, and you want to build something like that. But especially if you're just starting out, what you're going to find is you're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to start out with all this hope and drive, and it's going to build and build and build. And you're going to get to a point where you just get frustrated, you get stuck, and you're going to pull away from it. So the first thing that you need to do, especially if you're a solo developer or if it's just you and a partner, or even a small 3 or 4 man team, the first thing you want to do is you want to come up with something super small and super simple. Our first release, Survivor Rush, took me about 4.5 months to actually, from conception all the way out to publishing. And immediately after I published Murphy's Law, there's about 4 or 5 things that I found that didn't get found in debugging and testing. So I pretty much almost immediately had to release an update afterwards. So always test, and continue to test. I probably spend a little too much time now on testing because I want to try and catch all of those bugs. But that game right there is just a simple endless runner, right? It's an endless runner that's set in a zombie apocalypse time period. We made it in landscape, and if you're looking at the hyper casual game, you want to try and stick to portrait, right? And it's actually from the guys that created BuildBox, not BuildAbox, BuildBox. There was I think it was 100 and some odd page book or manuscript, whatever you want to call it, that they'd put out, and they talked about putting a hyper casual game in landscape makes you have to use 2 hands, or makes you want to use 2 hands, right? And these type of games are not designed for that. They're designed for you to pull your phone out, play on it for a few seconds while you're watching, while commercials on TV, or you're waiting in line at the bank, and be able to close it and put it away, or you're holding something in your hand and you're just kind of playing while you're walking down the street, doing whatever. So if you're going towards a hyper casual market, I would highly suggest that you stay with portrait, and that's what we're leaning more towards right now. Be able to do it one-handed pretty quickly. So the last thing I want to talk about today is finishing a project up to completion. So we have probably 20, maybe even 30 titles that we've started that are in some phase of development, either just bouncing around in the back of our heads, all the way up to we have coding and 50 to 70% of the game already done. And some of these are projects that we started that we found and where our level of coding and the things that we can do right now are not quite there yet, so we've kind of put them off to the back burner until we can get some more resources and properly do these games. And some of these are things that, 3 a.m. have the brilliant idea when I'm half asleep and I've got 2 brain cells working, and I get up and start writing some code and doing something, and then after a day or 2 I realize, wow, this is really stupid. Push it back to the side. Maybe I'll come up with something better for it later. And then up to some games that we've worked on. For me personally, I have a bad habit of trying to achieve perfection. So if you're kind of a perfectionist, you're never going to achieve perfection. So 90% complete and published is still going to be better than trying to get to that perfection line. You're always going to find something. All 3 games that we have out right now, there are multiple things on there that bug me. And I found myself, I would take these games and I would fixate on one specific thing and I would work on it for days or even weeks at a time, trying to get the perfect look. Or maybe everything was actually working just fine, but it just didn't have the look or the feel that I was going for, that I wanted. So I would work on it and I would tweak it and I would change it. And more often than not, I would end up screwing something up and having to go back 4 or 5 steps to fix what I screwed up. That's another thing that will happen to you quite regularly when you first start out, or at least happened to us anyway. All right, guys. Well, that's pretty much going to wrap it up this week. As always, if you've tried one of our games before, let us know how we're doing. The good, the bad, and the ugly. We want to hear it all. Uh, I completely lost my train of thought. So I'm going to wrap this up now and hope to see you next week. Oh, subscribe, like, and comment. That's what I was going to say. Next week.